building regulations fail dismally on thermal efficiency because they don't do the pressure door test. I've never met a building inspector who does a pressure door test. And about 60–70% now of our buildings are leaky, brand new buildings. Now I think that's also a fire hazard, and I would like your reaction on that. And also, when the building inspectors come in, and I don't know whether they're your own building inspectors or outsourced, privatised, in your borough, but will you be doing the overseeing?
On our own schemes, clearly we will use our own building control. At the moment, we have no power to force private developers to use council building control, and actually the system is set up in a way that actually encourages them and almost leads them not to, for all sorts of reasons. So at the moment the situation is, yes, I would probably argue that that this open market should be much more restricted, and that certainly for taller, bigger buildings, bigger schemes, you should have to use council building control, or council building control should have to sign off the work of approved inspectors at appropriate points. For larger scale schemes, I think possibly for loft extension and things like that, then that's probably a role for that market to operate in. But certainly on these larger scale buildings, because what you see is that major house builders have a single contractor often with a single approved inspector for the whole country, and they will do it from their desk in Cardiff in the main. And I think that is a concern.
Do you think there's seduction in this process?
So?
Well, it's quite something to say, but you know the whole thing goes, the spectrum is seduction to corruption, but I'm very worried by how easy it is to just sign off something, just do the tick box, the building inspectors.
Well, I think that's just become the nature of and it's interesting in some other European countries that essentially the planning is much more low-key and building control or its equivalent is much more predominant. And I think we have got in a position where in the UK, because of this, a market was set up around building control, and building regulations were not seen as being particularly important. Government didn't regularly refresh them, there wasn't much investment in them, and it was seen as being something which was almost a tick box exercise at the side. Planning was important, and you get your planning consent, but then building control was a process that followed after it, which could be done by anybody. And I think one of the lessons of Grenfell is that we need to take, as a country and as an industry, we need to take building regulations and construction and design much more seriously, and that therefore greater weight should be given to that area. As a local authority, if you miss your planning approvals, you get told off. If you don't turn your planning approvals around in 8 weeks, 16 weeks, etc., etc., you don't actually really have to provide much of a building control service. And actually successive governments were actually quite happy if you didn't, because you've got more scrutiny from auditors in terms of, are you overcharging for your building control service and unfairly competing with the private inspectors. So I think the whole status and view of that particular operation has been downgraded with potentially unfortunate effects.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's what we've seen as it's been introduced. It's really, really helpful, that remark.